If you could see the scene that's currently going on in my office as I try to film this, it is pure chaos. I've got Rhubarb trying to bury her way into a pile of clothes that I need to film a reel of. What are you doing? She's like shoving her head into it. And Crumble's got the zoomies. Crumble is literally just climbing on top of everything. And I've tried to stop them. They're my cats. What did I say? My cats? They're my cats. Crumble's just trying to climb on top of everything, and I've got to film this now because otherwise it's going to get dark. So if you hear scampering around, Rhubarb, what are you doing? If you hear scampering, that's it. But we're chill on this channel. We're chill, we're casual, it doesn't really matter. Wait, no, I need to get a video of what this cat's doing. Oh, you're just gonna stop. You're just gonna stop as soon as I turn on the camera. Oh, there you go. What are you doing, you crazy cat? God damn, I love them. Anyway, hi, welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to be talking to you about my top 10 sapphic books. I'm very aware this is a very niche topic that I'm probably not going to get that many clicks on, but I'm making this for me, and I'm making it for people who do want to click on it. If you are a sapphic woman yourself, if you're a woman-loving woman, if you're a lesbian, queer, however you identify, this is for you. And also, if you're straight and you just clicked on this out of curiosity, then hang around. Let me teach you about the wonderful world of sapphic fiction. Oh, and just because I always get people asking me, like, what does sapphic mean? It basically refers to female on female romance books, so like lesbian, bisexual, just women loving women, WLW, that's what that means. Fiction. And here's my list. If you know anything about me, you will know that being queer, being lesbian, is one of my main personality traits these days, and I say that with pride. That is not a bad thing at all. And I actually saw a really good TikTok earlier today saying this. We're on a tangent now. I saw a TikTok earlier today. It was like somebody stitching somebody who's being like, why have gay people got to make being gay their whole personality? Like, why can't they talk about anything else? I'm so sick of hearing about it. And I think it's when you go through the trauma of like figuring out that you are queer, figuring out who you are in that way, and when you finally get to a point where you're like proud of it, like that's a big thing. And it's like a point to be like, this is who I am, I'm proud of who I am, suck it if you don't like it. And yeah, basically, I don't know where I was going. What was my point? I don't know what my point was. There is such a wonderful, rich collection of sapphic fiction, just like LGBTQ plus fiction in general, out there now for people to read that just didn't exist at all when I was growing up. Like, I'm 28 years old now. When I was a teenager, there was one sapphic book, which I will be mentioning in this video. One. I mean, there's probably more, but like one that I could find and I could read and actually get my hands on. And now they are coming out of my ears, and it makes me so happy. It's the same with like queer music, queer TV shows, queer movies. It just didn't exist, and nowadays it is existing, and there's so much of it that I can't even keep up, and it just fills me with joy. Like, to be a teenager now, discovering who you are, discovering that you're queer, it must just be so much, I don't want to say easier, but there must be so many more resources available for you to like look to. Oh, it just makes me so happy. Anyway, I've been rambling for a really long time. Let's talk about some books. So these are my top 10 sapphic fiction books I've read. They sort of range from lit fic to YA to sort of everything in between that. And we're going to start with Buena by LaCour. Now, I did actually pause at including this one in this video because this isn't a book about being queer, but both the main characters are queer. I think they're both lesbians. I can't remember if one's bisexual, but I think both the main characters in this are lesbians. So I'd probably describe this as like contemporary fiction, I would say. In this book, you've got two storylines running parallel to each other of two different women. So you've got Sarah Foster and Emily Dubois. Sarah basically had a really shitty childhood, shitty teenage years, and she runs away from home and starts a whole new life in LA. Is it LA? Yeah, it is LA. I've read so many, I lose track of where and names and stuff. She starts this brand new life as a teenager in LA, and it's very much her coming to terms with not her sexuality so much. There's not really much question over sexuality in this book. They just are, which is really nice. But like coming to terms with this new life for herself and having to discover who she really is outside of the abuse of her childhood home. And so you've got the story of Sarah, then you've got the story of Emily, who is really close to her family, but she's trying to discover again who she is outside of that really tight-knit sort of relationship. And she sort of feels a bit, I'd say, suffocated by her family at points, but it's about recognising that she is her own person, but also she does love her family, and it's these two storylines running parallel to each other till eventually one day Sarah and Emily meet, and it's just love from there. But of course, both their own life experiences, especially Sarah's, means they have a lot of obstacles to overcome. Sarah sort of like pulls away because she's not used to feeling that level of love. It's just a really beautiful book. I would say the proper like queerness doesn't start in this until much further through than you would like, or you would think. I picked this up because I thought it was a lesbian romance. The romance is very much, it doesn't come in until like quite a significant way through the book. The rest of it is about their childhoods and their lives and them as like individual people, which makes for a beautiful book. When you pick it up wanting just like queerness, it's a bit like, but I'm including in this because it is just a beautiful, beautiful book, and I really, really enjoyed it. Then we have Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. I have seen so many criticisms of this book that just for the life of me, I cannot understand. I love this book so much. It's really, really stuck with me. And honestly, I'm a bit surprised it's not higher up in the list. But there's just some really wonderful books in this list that I want to talk about. So this is the story of Grace Porter. I think Rhubarb is literally snoring on the ground. If you can hear cat snoring, that's it. This is the story of Grace Porter. She is very, very much a perfectionist, type A kind of person. She has spent her whole life on this like one course to impress her father and get her PhD in astronomy? Yes, astronomy. And then after her PhD finishes, she's kind of like, oh, like what do I do now? Like, this is all I've ever wanted, and now I've reached it. I'm at this like dead end. And it's really funny actually talking about this now because I went through that exact same thing. My entire life since I was 18 years old, I have saved up to buy a house. That's all I've ever wanted, to own my own house. I don't know why, but it's just something I've always wanted to do for myself. I think it's because I love interior design. I love having a project, and having a house is like the biggest project you can have. And then as soon as we bought this house, I fell into like this period of deep, deep depression because I was like, I've got no purpose anymore, which is very dramatic, I'm aware, but like you can't help your brain. And same with Holly, my girlfriend, when she like finally became a chartered accountant and passed all her exams and was qualified, she was like, what am I doing now? Like, this is all I've worked for the past like 8 years of my life. Grace goes through a very, very similar thing. She gets her PhD and she is just like, she crashes. She doesn't know what to do next. So her best friends, as the best friends do, they cart her off to Las Vegas where she gets absolutely blind drunk and wakes up the next morning with a woman in her bed and she finds out that she is married. Now, this is not a book about like queer trauma. It's not a book about the pains of coming out, which those kind of books definitely do have their place in literature. But sometimes as a queer woman, it's just really nice to read a book that's not about the trauma and the pain and how difficult it is. Sometimes it's nice to read a book about someone who just is. Grace just is gay, and that's just part of her character and it's part of who she is. It's not a plot point necessarily in the book. The plot point is that she wakes up married to this random woman and she realises that she's fucked up, basically. But what's she gonna do about it? Because this woman is actually really, really hot and she kind of really likes her. So Grace lives on the West Coast. I want to say she lives in San Francisco, but don't quote me on that. But she definitely lives on the West Coast, and her new wife, who is called... Who's her wife? What's her wife called? Come on. I read this well over a year ago now, so the facts are a little bit blurry. Yuki. Her wife is called Yuki. Yuki lives in New York, and Yuki basically says to her, here's how you find me. If you decide you want to contact me, here's my details, but I'm going back home. So they go off to their separate ends of the country, and Grace eventually finds herself at Yuki's door in New York, and she goes on this big journey of self-discovery. This is just a book about navigating adulthood when you have no idea what it is that you want to do next. And I'm actually kind of intrigued to read this again now. I might actually get back into it over the Christmas season because I feel like I might be able to relate to this on a whole other level than I did when I read it last year. Being an adult is scary. Like, when I was a teenager, all I wanted to do was be an adult, and I love being an adult. I love having my independence and doing whatever I want, and my money is my money, and if I want to have cake for dinner, I can have cake for dinner. But it's also terrifying because there's nobody there to tell you what to do. As the great Taylor Swift said a couple of months ago at her NYU commencement speech, the bad news is you're on your own now. The good news is you're on your own now. That's what this book is. Next up, let's talk about the book that I teased in my introduction to this video, the one sapphic book I could find to read when I was a teenager, and that is Carol, or The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith. I don't actually have it to show you because I've lent it to a friend, but this book is old. This book is from 1952, and it's just a wonderful window into a world that a lot of people will never be able to relate to nowadays. A world in which it was literally illegal to be gay. I mean, laws have always been like a little bit iffy around lesbianism because, of course, most laws were written by men, and men have never seen women as sexual beings in their own right. So the thought of like lesbianism and two women enjoying each other in that way, it never occurred to them. So like, it's always been like shaky legal grounds, but it comes under the umbrella of homosexuality, and that hasn't always been illegal. It was illegal for a very long time. I actually did a whole video on my channel about something called the Hays Code and how that affected homosexuality in the media for many, many years. The video is mostly about homosexuality in film and TV, but it's very much applicable to books as well, so I'll link that down below in case anyone wants to go see it. Basically, you weren't allowed to include homosexuality in any form of media because it was morally corrupt. And the way that a lot of people got around this is by including homosexuality, but putting it in a very negative light. So basically, you will always kill off the gay at the end, or you would make them the villain. And The Price of Salt was so unusual for its time because it came out in 1952, and it actually featured a lesbian couple who have a happy ending, or at least it implies a happy ending, and it was absolutely groundbreaking at the time. So Carol is about these two main characters, Carol and Therese. Carol's a lot older, Therese is like in her 20s, I think. And they meet at a department store where Therese works, and Carol leaves behind her glove, so Therese has an excuse to basically contact her again, and from there this love affair starts. And Therese doesn't even know what lesbianism is. She doesn't know that it's even possible to like another woman in the way that she likes Carol, and it's just about their relationship. It's about the consequences they both suffer as a result of their relationship and how they sort of fight through this. This book is a slow burn, let me tell you. You couldn't really be very explicit back in 1952. Oh my god, the slow burn in this book. If you like a romantic slow burn where it's just characters who have this undeniable chemistry for so long but nothing happens for ages, oh my god, this book. Because when it finally happens, when they finally kiss, oh my god, the tension is just palpable. It is so good. It is a hard read. It is from 1953 and the style of writing reflects that, but I highly recommend it. Also, it got made into a movie with Cate Blanchett as Carol and Rooney Mara as Therese, and they just get it so right. The film is so good, and for some inexplicable reason, I only see that film as a Christmas movie. And seeing as I'm filming this on the 1st of December, you know what I'm watching tonight is Carol. Next up, let's go for a little YA, something a little bit lighter. This is Not My Problem by Kira Smith. I did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. I enjoyed every single page of this. This is about a character called Ideen. Ideen is this serial rule breaker. She's sort of like that cheeky girl at school who never really does what she's told, and she always talks back to the teachers, but she's kind of endearing. She really, really makes me laugh in this book. Ideen has just got such a sort of quick-witted sense of humour, and it is so, so rare for that kind of humour in written form to get me, but I laughed my way through this book. I found Ideen such a good character, and it just so turns out that Ideen is a lesbian. Again, this isn't some sort of tragic coming out story. This isn't about the traumas of being gay. Ideen just is a lesbian. She very much has problems in her life, like big problems. Being gay is not one of them, which is just really, really refreshing. So Ideen basically has this enemy, kind of like a school enemy called Maeve, and Maeve is like the school swot. She's top of every class and she runs all the clubs and she's that kind of person. And Maeve, it turns out, is struggling in her sort of like quest for greatness. Maeve asks Aideen to push her down the stairs so she can break her leg and get out of some of her responsibilities, and Aideen agrees, and then soon word spreads around the school that Aideen is helping people out in exchange for a favour at a later date. And that's basically the entire plot of the book. It's stupid and it's silly and it's very YA, but I just really, really enjoyed it. I just really like the characters, I really like the writing, I really want to read more of Kira Smith stuff. I just really felt like these characters were so well-rounded, so like 3D, like I just really felt like these characters were so well written, they were so well-rounded, like I feel like I could close my eyes and see them and like interact with them in my head, which maybe that's weird, but that's always a sign of a really well-written character when you can imagine them outside the confines of the story you're reading. I've never heard anyone say that before, but for me, that's a thing. Everyone raves about Kira Smith's other book, which is on the back here. It's called The Falling in Love Montage, and I've been wanting to read that for ages, so I am 100% going to pick that up soon, because if it's anything like this one, I'm going to really enjoy that. My aim was to try and film this video before it got dark outside, but it is currently 3:08 PM and it's definitely getting dark, so please excuse if the lighting gets continually worse throughout the rest of this video. But talking of a lack of queer trauma, next up we've got the epitome of queer trauma with The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. This is a story of Cameron Post, who lost her very loving parents at a very young age and was therefore sent to live with her aunt, who's super conservative, living in a small town in Montana. And once she's there, she begins to realise that she might be gay. She falls in love with her best friend, Coley Taylor. And this friendship is very intense. I think any sapphic woman will relate to having that best friend who's more than a best friend. It's definitely much more intense than a best friendship is, but neither of you really knows what the feelings are, and that's very much what Cameron and Coley are dealing with. And eventually everyone finds out about Cameron's feelings for Coley. Coley kind of throws Cameron under the bus a little bit, and Cameron gets sent to a conversion camp. If you've only ever seen the film of this book and you didn't like it, because I know a lot of people really didn't like it, I thought it was okay. But if you didn't like the film, I would still urge you to read this book, because this book does such a better job at building the world around Cameron, building who she is as a person, as well as her relationships with other people, which is what I feel like the movie really lacked in. The movie was very much about the conversion camp and very much focused on that. Whereas I think you need so much more context to understand who Cameron is and why she's there. And this book gives you every inch of that. What I really loved about this book, sort of aside from the queer thing, is Emily Danforth does such a good job at like setting the scene. Like you really feel like you're there in Montana. I haven't read this book in years. I've only ever read it once because it is quite traumatizing. It's quite difficult to get through. But Cameron works as a lifeguard, and I just like remember that really, really vividly, because the way that Emily writes it, it's just so vivid, and you feel like you're there, and you can feel that Montana heat, and you can feel like the splashing and the like children screaming and shouting at the pool. It's just really, really beautifully written. So the first half of this book very much sets up who Cameron is, and then it's only really the second half when she's at Promise, which is the name of the conversion camp. And it's really interesting because you're in Cameron's head and you feel all the things she feels, and you feel her as she's convinced that she's wrong, like that her sexuality is wrong and she's disgusting and she's going against the word of God. And it like really hits you like right deep in here. I'm not a religious person. I've never been a religious person. My family aren't particularly religious, so I'm very grateful that I never had to deal with that like religious trauma on top of all the like the regular trauma. But I could feel it and I could relate, and I cried so many times reading this book. This just feels like a really important book. It feels like the kind of book that could literally change lives if the right person read it. I think if you are dealing with the religious trauma around coming out as gay, then this will probably be an even more difficult read for you, but I feel like it could be really important at helping you overcome that and figuring out that it is all going to be okay. Yeah, I don't really have anything more to say about it. It's important, it's horrible, and it's a nice read. I think it's going to be a classic. I do think in like 100 years' time, people will read this and be like, how was that how people were treated? But with that, we are into the top 5 with something a lot lighter. This is Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur. This is like adult lesbian fiction. It is spicy, like so spicy. I always used to say that I hated romance books, but I've very much come to realise that I don't hate romance books. I don't hate romance. I just hate straight romance because I cannot personally relate to it at all. Give me a good lesbian romance, I'm all over it. I will read them all. I don't care how cheesy it is. I don't care how awful it is. I will read it. Not saying this book is awful because I love this so much. So this has every trope of the romance fiction you could find. You've got the completely opposite love interest. So here you've got Elle, who is literally an astrologer, hence the title Written in the Stars. She runs a Twitter page where she basically puts out horoscopes for a living. She's very like silly and dopey, and she's clumsy and just like a bit all over the place all the time, and she's just like head in the clouds type of person. And then you've got Darcy, who is just the antithesis of Elle. Darcy is very uptight, very serious. I can't even remember what her job is, but it's something incredibly boring. What is her job? I don't know. She's got a boring, like proper, serious adult job. And they are set up on a date by Darcy's brother, and immediately they don't hit it off. They don't like each other at all, and they go their separate ways. And then things happen, and Darcy and Elle basically come to an agreement to pretend to be in a relationship. That old romance book trope. So they pretend to be in a relationship just to get their families off their back. It's coming up to the holiday season. They just like need somebody to go to parties with. And of course, in the process of all that, they actually fall in love. Is all the stupid romance tropes that you would need in one book. I really enjoy it. When I say to you, I just completely fell in love with both these characters. I fell in love with their relationship. Like, I want more. I know Alexandria Belfleur has written more in this series, but I don't think the rest of the series are about these two characters specifically. I think they're about like side characters in this book, but maybe I'm going to read them. If anybody's read the sequels to this, then please do let me know if they're worth reading. But I really enjoyed it. I have nothing more to say. I've run out of words. It's just stupid and it's silly, and it's actually still quite hard to find really well written sapphic fiction for adults. Like, there is a lot of sapphic YA, which is wonderful. I think YA is the sort of like genre where this representation is needed the most, but it's hard to find in like the adult spheres. Like, I will read all the YA, I'll read it all, I don't care. But sometimes it's nice to read something that's like meant for my age group and I can actually like really relate to. And this is one of the only ones I found. Next up, we have One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I would say this book kind of sits on like the precipice between YA and adult fiction. It's very much like in the middle there. It's about two characters in their like early 20s, so it's very much focused at that age group. When I first read this book, I was like, don't love it. It was a bit of a slog to get through. Like, I did enjoy it, but I wouldn't have thought it'd be up there with like my favourite sapphic fiction. But I read this a year ago, and when I say these characters just like burrowed themselves in my mind, I think about this book like literally every day. I'd be doing like any random thing, then I'd be like, oh, that happened in One Last Stop. Or I'd just be like sat there daydreaming, and I'd be daydreaming about this book. I don't know what it was about this one that clawed its way in so hard, but it really did. I think what I struggled with most when I was reading this is the fact it's got these weird like supernatural elements to it. Like, the whole premise of the book is that something weird and supernatural has happened. I don't want to spoil things, but it's got like this weird magical supernatural element to it, and I really don't like books like that. Like, I'm not into like fantasy books at all. I'm not into anything supernatural, not really into like sci-fi, just not my thing. And I didn't realise that going into it, so I think when I read this and it started to go in that direction, I was very like taken aback. But I think had I known that going in, I would have been more prepared and I would have been like okay with it, if that makes sense. But here you've got the story of 23-year-old August. She is bisexual. She is very shut off from the world. Like, her heart is like in a caged box. She is not interested in meeting anyone. She wants to move to New York. She doesn't want to make any friends. She just wants to go to university and get on with her life. But of course, she moves into this sort of flat with these roommates. So one of her roommates is a trans man. One is gay. She lives next door to a drag queen. That might be wrong, but that sounds right to me. And these characters are just like so well written. I fell in love with the roommates more than I fell in love with August herself. But of course, August also falls in love with those roommates. And then August one day gets on the tube, what's it called? The subway in New York. And she meets a girl called Jane. And Jane's like very odd, very punk rockery. She just like absolutely is obsessed with her from the moment she meets her. And she can't stop thinking about her. Every day August gets on the same subway to get to university, and every single day she sees Jane there, until one day she plucks up the courage to ask her out, only Jane turns her down, and August eventually comes to realise that she's never seen Jane outside of the subway. She's never seen her get off, and she never changes. Like, she's wearing the same thing every single day, doing the same thing every day, and she begins to wonder, like, what the hell's going on. And I'm going to not tell you any more about that plot because otherwise I'll spoil it. Actually, no, I don't think I'll spoil it because it is literally written here in the blurb. I'll read you the last sentence of this blurb. Casey McQuiston's One Last Stop is a magical, sexy, big-hearted romance where the impossible becomes possible as August does everything in her power to save a girl lost in time. So Jane is lost in time. She is stuck in one point of time on this subway, like this singular subway carriage, and August wants to figure out how to get her off. But if she gets Jane off the subway, is she gonna survive? Like, will she go back to her time, which is the 70s, or will she stay in 2020 with August? You'll have to find out. I would also highly, highly, highly recommend Red, White and Royal Blue, also by Casey McQuiston, but that's not being featured in this video because it is gay romance. Men loving men, not women loving women. Historical lesbian fiction. Yes, please. This book is set in the 50s. It's Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This is the story of 17-year-old Lily, who has grown up in a Chinese family in Chinatown in San Francisco, and she begins to realise very slowly that she is gay. And not only is she dealing with the fact that it's the 1950s, like I said, it's illegal to be gay, she knows that nobody's going to accept her. Like, growing up in this time, chances are 99% of the time your family is not going to accept you for being homosexual. So Lily knows, no matter what, that she's probably not going to be very well accepted, but also she is from this Chinese American family, and there's a lot of expectations of Lily as she grows up, what she's meant to do with her life, and nothing that Lily wants to do matches up with her family's expectations. And on top of all that, this is the 1950s, the Red Scare, the fear of communism was alive and well, and being Chinese American, you are under very close scrutiny from everyone, particularly the government. And if Lily puts one step out of line, she knows that the government are going to come for her parents. Not in like a going to kill them way, but they're going to get deported. Lily meets this girl called Kath, and together they realise that they like each other, they're homosexuals, and they start to go to this place called the Telegraph Club, which is essentially an underground gay bar, which was very, very illegal in this time. There's drag performers, so many other lesbians, gay men. It's like this entire community. It's the only place that Lily can find community and feels accepted and loved. Only, of course, one day the Telegraph Club gets raided, as so many gay bars did in this time, and Lily's whole life turns on its head. And it's just an absolutely heartbreaking account of what it was like to not only be gay in the 1950s, but to be Chinese American in the 1950s. And this book is true to life. It's not a fairy tale. It's very realistic as to what somebody like Lily's experience would have been in the 1950s. Something I particularly loved about this book, as obviously it is historical fiction, it is so, like, on point. Like, all of the references that Malinda Lo makes in this book are things that actually happened, and it's all, like, true. At the very back of the book, wait, let me find it. In the very back of the book, in the author's notes, I don't think you're going to be able to see that because of the lighting, but Malinda Lo's basically written explanations as to, like, everything she speaks about. So it's like on language, on the 1950s, on San Francisco, on Chinatown and Chinese Americans, and on lesbians, gender and community. This book is about finding community in a world where they didn't want you to have community. Oh my god, it's so good. It's so beautiful. You will cry, you will sob, but it is wonderful. And we are on to our top two. I feel like I've been talking forever at this point, but I've just got so much to say. But my second favourite sapphic book has got to be Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I read this, I've said this loads of times on my channel already, so you're probably bored of hearing it. I read this over my birthday back in June when I had COVID, and I was in like this COVID fever, which means this whole book feels like some sort of like fever dream to me, and I enjoyed every single second of this. I devoured this book so quickly. I said with Written in the Stars, it's really hard to find like really good lesbian adult fiction. This is the second good one that I found. Ashley Herring Blake has such a good way of writing characters. I feel like I've said that like 10 times in this video already. But these characters just feel so real. Again, I can close my eyes and I can see them there. Like, still now, I read this 6 months ago and they're so vivid to me. I just really, really enjoyed every second of this. This is the story of Delilah Green, as the title would suggest, who is a really successful photographer back in New York City, and she gets invited back to her hometown where she grew up, called Bright Falls, to photograph her stepsister's wedding, only she hasn't seen her stepsister or her stepmum in many, many years. They did not have a very good relationship growing up. But she goes back there just because they've offered her a lot of money to do so, and once there, she kind of falls for her stepsister Astrid's maid of honour, Claire. Maid of honour, bridesmaid, best friend, Claire. And it starts off as a way for Delilah to wind up her stepsister Astrid. She's like, I'm going to get with your best friend, and Astrid's like, don't you dare, and Delilah's like, bet, I'm going to do it. Spoiler alert, she does it. And it's about their relationship, but what I really like about this book is it's so multi-layered. There's so many different aspects to the story and nothing's really like scrimped upon. So you've got Delilah, who's very like strong-headed, very stubborn, like she knows what she wants and she's going to go out there and get it. You've got Astrid, who's very like type A, very proper, who just wants to please her mum. You've got the stepmum, who I think is called Isabel, who's just a bit of a dick. So you're sort of dealing with that family dynamic. You sort of learn throughout the book why Delilah and Astrid really didn't like each other growing up, and sort of the miscommunications between children that just became this big void between the two of them. Then you've got Claire, who's a single mum dealing with her shitty ex-husband, ex-boyfriend, and like trying to raise her daughter the best she can. You've also got Iris, who's the other friend in like the trio, who is with her boyfriend and he really wants kids and she doesn't want kids. And there's just so many angles to this book. And obviously mostly it is about Claire and Delilah's relationship, but it doesn't feel like it scrimps? It doesn't scrimp on the backstories of any of these other characters. Like, it really is so multi-dimensional. I could literally sit here and tell you the life stories of every single one of these characters, and the book is only 371 pages long. Like, that's really impressive. Sorry, my phone is buzzing away. Also, the sex scenes in this, spicy, more so than Written in the Stars. Like, this is spicy, is all I'm going to say. It's a lot. Which brings us, of course, onto my favourite, and arguably just the best sapphic fiction book in existence, and that is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. The more I think about this book, the more I think this actually might be my favourite book of all time. Like, it might have actually dethroned Aristotle and Dante, because this book, it just affects me every day. I think about this book every day. Like, everything I do feels inspired by this book, which is ridiculous. It has a piece of my heart, this book, it really does. I don't actually think there's anyone left on this planet who hasn't read this yet, but just in case you haven't, here's a quick synopsis. This is the story of Evelyn Hugo, who is really famously known for having 7 husbands throughout her life. Evelyn's now in like her 80s and she's decided that she's finally ready for the whole world to know the truth about who she is, who Evelyn Hugo really is, and she hires this journalist called Monique to come and basically write her biography. You know what, I'm 28 years old and I still don't know the difference between autobiography and biography. Like, I know what each one is, but I never know which way around it is, but you get what I'm trying to say. So the timeline in this book jumps from like Evelyn and Monique in the present, Evelyn telling the story, and back in like the 1950s, the golden age of Hollywood, Evelyn is this super, super famous Hollywood star, and it goes through like each chapter is named after a different one of her husbands, and she tells the story of each and every husband. Only it turns out that Evelyn never cared for a single one of her husbands. She married them for myriad different reasons. The true love of Evelyn's life was Celia St. James, another woman, another golden age actress. So now Evelyn's finally ready for the whole world to know the truth about who she is, and the truth about her love, and the truth about what they had to go through back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I think this book just really speaks to me because not only is it sapphic, it's also historical. It focuses on that like golden age of Hollywood that I'm just absolutely fascinated by. And I'm also absolutely fascinated by queer history and the sort of lengths people had to go to hide their love and to be safe. Like, this has everything from queer joy to queer trauma to everything in between. It is heartbreaking, but also make you smile and laugh and cry tears of joy, but also like tears of sorrow and sadness. It's just beautifully written. If there's one thing that Taylor Jenkins Reid does really well, it's world building. She builds this really vivid picture of who Evelyn was and the world that she lived in, and I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing about this book, but I would die to read this again. Like, if I could read this again for the first time, oh, the things I would do, but I actually think I might read it again over the Christmas period because I just want to spend some more time with Evelyn. Maybe that's a really basic book to have as my number one, but the heart doesn't lie. The heart wants what it wants, and I want Evelyn Hugo and Celia St. James. I just love them so much. I've been filming for an absolute age. It is now pretty much dark outside, so I'm going to go now and edit this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.